event of 2021 through ICA. And most of you are very familiar with ICA, but I just want to say a couple of words about ICA. First of all, I'm Padma Achari. I'm a member of the ICA Executive Committee, and I'm very happy to welcome all of you to the forum event of 2021. ICA has been around since 1968, and the vision is to empower a secure and healthy life for all in a sustainable environment and a just society through collective action. Today's forum event is going to show us exactly that, what everybody is doing. And some of the areas of focus for ICA are education, health, alleviation of poverty, and lifelong, work on gender equality and all of this. Towards that, we have just started a new program to encourage youth to participate in NGOs in India and get a lifelong experience. We have women leadership programs going on. We have an ICA 3.0 project where ICA is sponsoring projects. So please feel free to get connected with ICA, those of you that are not familiar. And let's build this relationship with everyone. Today, we are very excited to host the forum event with two very eminent speakers and members of society community who are doing exactly what ICA has been doing. And so we want to welcome Dr. Ravi Chopra and Ms. Zubin Sharma. And our moderator today is Ritu Marwa. She is a very well-known writer, and in her previous avatar, she was an executive in the Silicon Valley. She's a fellow of the Annenberg School of Journalism at the University of Southern California and UCLA's Laboratory for Environmental Narrative Strategies. And she got her bachelor's at St. Stephen's College, an MBA from IIFT, and a master's in philosophy from JNU. And she has several awards and accolades. I'm not going to go over all of them here, but she has several awards and accolades and recognitions for her work and her versatility. And the most important thing, I think, is she stands in solidarity with the victims of child prostitution and human trafficking, and is acting to support human rights for trafficked survivors. So without further delay, let me hand over to Ritu. So please remember, mute yourselves. You want to go off of video, that is fine. And listen, enjoy this conversation, and we will be back with the questions after this wonderful conversation. Thank you. Good morning to me. Good evening to you, Ritu. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Welcome everyone to ICA's first forum of this year. We have on our forum today, on our panel, two change makers, as Padma just told us, Ravi Sharma and Ravi Chopra and Zubin Sharma. They gave up everything in the US and moved to India. Ravi went in 1979 and Zubin went 30 years later. And to share their journey, Ravi is zooming in from Dehradun and Zubin is from New York. So I would like to welcome both of you to the forum, and thank you so much. We are so excited because, Ravi was born at the stroke of India's independence in 1947. He is an alumnus of IIT Bombay and Stevens Institute of Technology, New Jersey. And when he grew up in India, there was the euphoria of nation building, and that suffused his childhood. His mama or his mother's brother was a freedom fighter. So it was no surprise that Ravi returned to India in 1979 after completing his research, and accompanying him was his new bride, Jo McGovern, who herself was an activist and an ardent supporter of freedom. So Ravi has spent 5 decades in the field of development and is widely recognized as an authority in the interaction between technology, society, environment, and development. And I think the fascinating thing is that even 30 years ago, his first task when he went back was to write the first citizen report on the state of India's environment in 1982 and analyze India's water requirements in the 21st century. Those of us in California who are used to the drought know how important water is. And I believe Ravi has in Dehradun on his house a 40 kiloliter roof rainwater harvesting tank. So kudos to that. And Ravi also is a founder and former director of People's Science Institute and Himalayan Foundation, which is also in Dehradun. And he has served on several committees of the Indian government and nonprofits, including he was the chairman of the expert body to assess environmental degradation of hydroelectric projects in Uttarakhand and their impact during the June 2013 flood disaster on an order of the Supreme Court. He was also a member of the National Ganga River Basin Authority chaired by the Prime Minister of India. And at present, he is the chairman of a very high-powered committee set up by the Supreme Court to study the impact of the Char Dham Prayojana on the Uttarakhand and Himalayas. It's a 900-kilometer highway system that is going to link Gangotri, Yamunotri, Kedarnath, Badrinath. But the point is that it is being built on one of the most fragile and important ecosystems. And Ravi is heading that committee. We are very, very honored and excited to hear from Ravi about what India was like when he went 30 years ago, and what is it like now when Zubin has gone back. Zubin has also a very interesting background. He grew up also in a house where service was the ethos. And he says that a lot of his impulse to be empathetic comes from his mother, Pamela Morin, because many immigrant families have been adopted by their family. And Zubin's father, Naveen Sharma, is also born close to India's independence. He wanted to return to India and put his shoulder to the wheel of nation building. So Zubin grew up with all these stories, and he used to travel to India over the summer. His grandmother had a school in Lucknow. And so he started on his mission a lot earlier. In 10th grade, I think he was 16, and he took a group of students. And as soon as he completed his BA and MS from the University of Pennsylvania, he kind of headed that way. He was awarded the prestigious Nonprofit Leadership Award, a full tuition sponsorship, which is only awarded to one incoming student. He has been an Acumen Fellow, a UPenn Center for Social Impact Strategy Fellow, a Dasra Social Impact Leadership Program Fellow. He's a TEDx speaker. So we are really honored that we have with us two wonderful people who have, gone to India at a time when India was finding its feet. And then now 75 years later, Zubin is in the remotest, and yet he says the most populous state and area of Bihar. And therefore the impact is a lot more. And so what he is doing is, he has, maybe I should, kind of let him say what his program is, but basically he's building the potential of the youth and getting them involved in the development of India. So I think I'm going to now request Ravi to tell us, this fascinating report you did 30 years ago, where environment was probably not the first thing on India's mind. So how do you see how India has, done over 30 years, 5 decades of work, and what does it look like in terms of water and environment in India now and when you reached there?
Thank you, Ritu. Just a minor correction. Joe and I have been in this country for the last 40 years. Um, Today, there is much greater environmental concern in the country. That is for sure. But the scope for successes is much more limited. And that is because the present dispensation is not very supportive. It has been whittling down the environmental regulatory framework. Wherever the courts are supportive, there are some successes. The real crisis is that the leadership, and I'm not saying that it's just the government, the entire leadership is simply not looking at community-based approaches to tackling the challenge of climate change. And that is very much here now. It's not in the future. Okay. As far as the water issue is concerned, the good news is that there isn't a real shortage of water, but it is the mismanagement of our water resources that is creating what looks like perennial problems of water shortages and non-availability. That's it.
So,
Have I answered your question?
So that is very interesting that you say that there is no shortage of water in India, because we always hear about this monsoon, sometimes, even while growing up, like water harvesting, do you think is being done at the scale that it should be done?
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we don't realize how much rain falls in this country and how much water we need. If we took care of things, you must remember that Jaisalmer was traditionally a very important stopping point for caravans coming from the west. And Jaisalmer is in the heart of the Thar Desert. So if they could host caravans of 300 or 400 wagons a day with rainfall less than 10 centimeters a year, you can just figure out how much water this country has. So it's simply a question of mismanagement. If we pollute our rivers, ponds, lakes, that water doesn't, it becomes unavailable for use, at least for household purposes. Okay? So it's a mismanagement problem.
Do you find that the mantle is being taken by the youth, and are people taking matters into their own hand when the government is failing them?
The youth is definitely quite active today, and especially where I live, in Dehradun, there are a lot of young people who are active. The older generation seems to have pulled back a little bit. They tried hard to introduce change, but they find that the system does not respond to it. So the older generation is not as active as it was, and that's quite reasonable. When they were young, they were very active.
Zubin, your experience has been similar. I mean, you've been there 10 years. Do you feel a little disheartened as well?
Um, thanks a lot, Rituji. And thank you so much to Aika for giving me this opportunity and platform. Some of you also might be wondering why I'm in New York. So basically, I've been here during the pandemic, but if you can see the background in my picture, that's taken in Kishanganj, Bihar. And that's actually Kanchenjunga in the background, which you can see on a clear day. So sort of responding to the question. So a lot of my experience has been around this question of what does development mean for India? And I think from there, not only a question of what or how, but also who, who whose responsibility is it and who can sort of take that work forward. And for us, the answer has always been the youth, because in villages in Bihar, you find that youth are sort of in this space between, they're not children and therefore they're not treated like children, but they're also not adults. Like in Bihar, you'll hear from people by age 40, like, "Arey, umar to ho gayi hai, hamara zamana to khatam ho gaya hai." So you don't hear that kind of thing from youth. So they're still malleable and open and willing to learn. And so much of our work and strategy has been around how do we sort of engage youth and provide a platform to youth to identify, define, and then work on various issues that they find in their community.
But Zubin, when you first went 10 years ago, how was it different? How has it changed since then? Have you seen your space of work change?
I do think that the spread of the internet has had many impacts, both for the better and for the worse. Just as a sort of personal aside, I remember, so I first went to Kishanganj, Bihar during, some time off from my university degree. And I remember I had a couple of like assignments and things that I had to send to my university. And I had to use 2G internet to try and sort of send files. And it took a long time, and you'd watch that ball sort of keep going. And so I think now you'll find sort of a mobile phone in every person's hand, which comes with new challenges like disinformation and people sort of hearing rumors, which can create all kinds of like communal issues and also disinformation problems. But it also opens up new scope for learning, for exposure, and for growth. So I think that's one major challenge that I've seen, or one major change that I've seen.
That snowballing of information which comes with its pluses and minuses.
Right.
I would thought that I mean, that shows how limited I am, but I thought that in Kishanganj is the connectivity that good?
Yeah, it's reasonably good. I wouldn't say that every single household has a smartphone, but you'll see like in every mohalla there'll be someone who has a smartphone.
I see. And do you find that you have changed? Like, who were you when you first started your work in India, and who are you today, 10 years later?
So I think, as you mentioned, my mother is from the US and my father is from India. And so I think for me growing up, there was sort of that like a little bit of that like swadesh, like wanting to go back to my roots and getting to know about my roots, which kind of sounds a bit cliche and funny to say, but that's sort of how I felt. I think over the last decade, what's really happened is as I've spent almost all of my time in rural Bihar, and I've really kind of grown roots there and connected with our local team, I think a lot of my own identity has changed. Like I'm more used to speaking in Hindi frequently. A lot of the examples that I think of are sort of Bihar based. And so I think in many ways, a lot of my own identity has started to like grow and plant roots in Bihar as well.
Do you find it a struggle to stay motivated? Like Ravi said the older generation has kind of, butted heads with the administration. And then, so do you have to kind of motivate yourself? How do you do that?
So I think I see the work that I'm doing and also work that people like Ravi ji and many other activists and sort of social change leaders in India are doing as sort of a 100-year project. I think it's something that will hopefully go beyond myself. And I think it's about how do we fundamentally change how people think about one another and how people conceptualize the future of India. And I think that that's a very slow process. I think achieving economic growth, helping to grow the economy, maybe improving health outcomes, I think that maybe happens a lot faster than how do you get people to fundamentally respect every human being? How do you get people to respect the environment and other species, like what Ravi ji is talking about? I think that's a much longer term project. And I think it's something that I see as probably taking maybe 100 years. So I think as soon as I zoom out and I kind of take that perspective, I feel more motivated to continue.
Ravi, do you feel that as well? That when you first went there, you were like Zubin, Did you face challenges? Give us an anecdote about how you dealt with the challenge that you were faced.
I was a bit unlike Zubin, not much experience about social change, and therefore much more hopeful that change would occur in my lifetime. Uh, Today, first of all, Ritu, I'm not at all disheartened. Okay. Um, if you have ever watched that film, Boot Polish, there is a song in that film, Nanne Munne Bacche, Teri Muthi Mein Kya Hai? Hmm? It's an allegorical tale about two young nations that come into being, India and Pakistan. So just switch those two kids for the two young nations. And in that song, there is a line, Badlega Zamana, ye sitaron mein likha hai. And I am a firm believer in that. Okay? No questions about it. You may also recall Eldridge Cleaver's book, Soul on Ice. And if you have that copy, which I have, it says in the top right-hand corner, if you are not a part of the solution, you are a part of the problem. So I've chosen to be a part of the solution. Okay? And that's what motivates me.
That's excellent. You also work with a lot of young people and fellows with the Himalaya Foundation. What has your experience been with that?
What I've found is we've generally tried to respond to the needs of struggling social activists, people who are self-motivated, but find it difficult to continue with their work, either for financial reasons or for direction. And the main task over there is to mentor them. Wherever there is good mentoring, and mentoring is done by several people, wherever there is good mentoring, the results are very heartening. But every now and then the mentor fails, and there is some disappointment. Overall, I think the selection of the young fellows makes a big difference. And so, for example, the last bunch that we've had has been quite outstanding.
Did you have a mentor when you went to India?
Oh, I've had several. Even before I went to India, I had mentors. I've had mentors all my life. And what I am today is because of them.
Okay? And so who was your role
model? There's Professor Mehta, one of the key people in the establishment of or regeneration of Indians for Collective Action. There is Dr. G.D. Agarwal, who gave up his life for Ganga River. There are people like my own friend, Dunu Roy, just a year senior to me, and I regard him as a mentor. In some ways, my wife.
She's doing tremendous work with the, is it the Lotika Roy Foundation? I think we may have, Ravi may have frozen a little bit. I think we'll wait for him to come back. Zubin, what was the India that you encountered? Did you encounter Ravi's India?
So I think when I first went to India, I thought of it as sort of one nation, and I thought that whatever it was that I was looking for, I would find. So the first time that I really did sort of grassroots work, I went to a part of Bihar called West Champaran district in the northwest corner of Bihar. And I was working with a social enterprise there that gasifies rice husks to create power in off-grid areas. And I stayed there for about 2 months, basically in like a kutia structure and in a very remote corner, oftentimes struggling to find clean water and just to sort of make it through the day. And I think that was an incredibly humbling experience for me because I was sort of expecting, or I had always been told in college that, you're going to go out and change the world and so on. And then I went there and I realized that just for me to get through the kind of struggles that, local people have to do day in and day out, right? A farmer who has to go out in that, 40, 42-degree weather to work in his or her farm. I think I realized that I was so weak and didn't necessarily have that strength to do that. So I think I recognized very quickly that if I wanted to do anything, it would require a lot of listening and patience, and also building relationships with people in order to really understand, I guess, what India was or what India is.
So how old were you when you went to Champaran?
I think I was 21.
And you were all by yourself for 2 months?
Yeah, I mean, there were local people, and there were also some interns who came in and out. But yeah, for the most part, I was there just staying in the village, in sort of a one-road village.
And was food and, heat or any of those deterred you, or didn't?
Yeah, so I don't know, every part of India has like a famous kind of food. So in Bihar, the most famous food is litti chokha. So the one like restaurant there had litti sort of 24/7. That was the main food that I ate for those couple of months. So yeah, it's definitely challenging. I'd say I probably lost about 5 kgs in those couple of months, but I think I had so many incredible learnings in terms of becoming much more humble in my approach, learning to listen, also recognizing that, like you were mentioning at the start, that Bihar is a state now with basically 125 million people. And if it were a country, it'd be maybe the 12th or 13th largest. And it would be basically one of the poorest countries in the world. And I realized that very few people wanted to go there. So when I would mention that I was going there, I would sort of be warned against going there. And I think I realized that here's this state, it has such a, in many ways, illustrious history as sort of the place where Buddha sort of achieved enlightenment, the oldest university in India, and yet it's sort of now facing so many different challenges, and yet few people are sort of wanting to work there. And so it also deepened my resolve to want to do something in and for Bihar.
And your project has morphed a little bit from what it started. Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Right. So I think initially, one sort of constant throughout has been this core theme of youth, and how do we enable youth, again, to identify problems in the community, and how do we give them the sort of training and mentorship to work on a range of issues across, education, health, livelihoods, and so on. But initially, because I was working with Pratham, which is an educational NGO, we basically trained the local youth to carry out some of their interventions. So, teaching children basic literacy, Anganwadi program, mother literacy, and so on. And we had them going into the community for a couple of hours per day, and then coming to our facility to learn digital literacy, English, literacy, life skills, and so on. Since then, we've continued to expand those kinds of programs, which are sort of like fellowships, which have a sort of project-based part where people go out and they actually do something in the community, but then we combine it with sort of lots of programming in like leadership and life skills. Two other things really quickly that I want to share. So the other thing that we've been working on a lot, and this comes a lot and is very relevant to the ICA name, right? Indians for Collective Action. So I think when you actually think of a person in a village in India who's facing multiple issues from, healthcare, education, livelihoods, governance, and so on, there's a need to have a sort of multi-dimensional approach as opposed to just focusing on one issue. And so one of the things that we're doing now is we have like an anchor put down in Kishanganj. And so we're inviting in other organizations to come in, and then we're supporting them to work on a whole range of issues. And then the third thing that we're doing is we have this Earthshala campus. So Earth comes from Hindi, Earth for economy and meaning, and also from English Earth. And we're trying to build sort of a center to pioneer and to spread methods for sustainable development in Bihar and in India.
I see. Ravi, we lost you, sorry, a little while ago. The good news is we don't hear any of the shots being fired in your neighborhood. If Ravi, if you could give a piece of advice to Zubin, you know, if he's sitting in his kuti in Bihar in the dark all by himself, and you had to give him one piece of advice, what would you give him?
He doesn't need any advice. He's doing very well on his own.
What do you think, Zubin?
But Zubin, this is more important, I think, I think you are doing it, which is not to take oneself too seriously.
Right.
And I think you are enjoying yourself. You know how to have fun. And one way that I enjoy, but I have a lot of fun. It's a very simple way. Don't make sense if you can make nonsense. Try it.
Yeah, no, that's definitely good advice.
Okay.
And Zubin, what would be one thing you would like to say to the older generation?
Ravi in particular.
Ravi in particular. I know Ravi's never old though.
So I think I'm not addressing this to the older generation as such, but I think one thing I find in cities in India, there's this sense of like that people in villages are like, oh bechara, kya karega, kuch nahi kar payega, bas usko help karna hai, you know, like that mentality that people are so sort of weak and unable and so on. And I think that mentality is very misplaced in my experience. I think that the kind of strength and resilience that I've seen in teammates of mine, including my local co-founder and many others in the team, is something that I strive for in my own life, but I definitely can't say that I have. And so I think that idea of like needing to go and help people as opposed to just providing platforms and sort of a supporting environment, I think has been a big learning for me and is very different from sort of what I had maybe heard or like maybe seen on TV in the US of, you know, you always see people who are so weak and unable to kind of help themselves.
भागलपुरी सिल्क एक साड़ी होनी चाहिए
मेरे पास भी भागलपुरी सिल्क है but it's in mauve printed.
I think we have a discussion on Bhagalpuri silk sarees going, which is actually very interesting. And I wonder if Zubin goes back with the shopping list from his friends in New York to buy Bhagalpuri sarees. Do you?
Yeah, sometimes. Actually, we have like you can see, our campus right now is primarily a tea garden, and so we actually are growing tea. So sometimes we gift tea to people as well. Kishanganj is the only district in Bihar that grows tea, though tea is very bad for sort of ecological balance. So we're trying to move away from that. But
oh well, that's interesting. I never thought there were tea gardens in Bihar. I always thought it was more Sikkim. So that means it is a little hilly then. I mean, from your background, Kanchenjunga is that close by?
So we're in the plains, but yeah, we're close to the foothills of Darjeeling and Sikkim.
And so actually Ravi's in Dehradun, and so you're in a pretty similar landscape, except Dehradun is more sparsely populated, I suppose, than Bihar. Ravi, what do you think? If you had one question for Zubin, would you have a question for him? You gave him an advice. Do you have a question for him?
Yeah, the question is, Zubin, how comfortable are you with the local language now? Do you speak it with the local people?
Yeah, so actually, even within our team, I think there's maybe 13, 14 languages that people speak. So I can't speak all, maybe a couple words here and there. The main local language is called Surjapuri that I'm reasonably comfortable with. It's sort of like Bengali. Then there are a couple of Adivasi languages, which I know some words and slowly I'm learning. And then also some of the other Bihari languages like Maithili, Bhojpuri, that others in the team, I'm slowly learning those as well.
Very curious about the young people. What is the profile of the young people you are working with and the gender ratio?
So we primarily work with young women. Generally speaking, so we have different kinds of programs. So as we're actually building our campus, which we're building primarily with Adobe bricks and with bamboo to kind of do it sustainably, many of the youth who are working in that program are, might not have been to school, or are not particularly educated in like a formal sense. A lot of the people though who work in, let's say, education programs, healthcare programs, they're youth who have gone to school, but maybe now can't find jobs. So in fact, in Bihar, the more educated you are, the more likely you are to be unemployed because people can't find jobs. There's that saying, na ghar ka hai, na ghat ka hai, meaning like they're no longer willing to do the sort of traditional work at home, but they also can't necessarily get the jobs, like in the formal sector. So.
Okay. Very good.
Zubin, do you have a question for Ravi?
I have many questions. I think my first one would be, am I allowed to sort of come and visit you? I think I'd really enjoy that, and I'd really like to spend some time with you.
Sure, you're most welcome.
And secondly, what do you think is your biggest source of hope right now?
That's a tough one. But as I said, those sorts of things generally don't enter my mind. I know that the world is going to take care of itself, and people are constantly attempting to set things right. Okay? And as I said earlier, the hope, when I see the young people taking on major environmental issues around me, that gives a lot of hope. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, you know what? I always am a little skeptical, and I think like, oh, how much difference can one individual make? And the systems go back years and years, and how do you retrain people? And even with environment, you go hiking and people are just throwing trash everywhere, and it really disheartens you. And then the young people, the millennials who have so much hope, and they always tell me, says, if you're walking down the beach, and there are a lot of turtles that have been stranded, and you start picking and throwing them into the ocean, and you think, I mean, how much difference can I make? Like, look at the number of turtles here. But my son says, but to that one turtle that you throw back, it's his life. So I think that if we did not have people like Ravi, I think we would be in a far worse situation with regard to environment and water. We needed people to warn us, to look at issues that we would, dur drishti, as they say. Some people have it, and people like Ravi showed us that you have to plan for the future. And Zubin brings a lot of hope, because I think his generation, you were telling me, Zubin, that there is a proliferation of young people and nonprofits, and that your organization has now decided to show them the way and deal with some of the issues that they would struggle to learn, right? So I think that if it wasn't for committed people like you, I think we need less people in the world like me, but more people in the world like you. I think we have some audience questions. Padma was going to field them. Padma, do we have some audience questions you wanted to share?
Yes. Thank you, Ritu. Ritu, Zubin, and Ravi, this has been most wonderful to just sit and listen. And I don't know, it'll take a long time to absorb everything, but thank you so much. So we have some questions from the audience. The first question we would like to ask Ravi is, what has been your relationship with Aika? If you can share with us a few thoughts.
Well, there was a time back in 1968, 69, when ICA, as it was founded initially, had become dormant. It was revived sometime in 69, 70 with the entry of Professor Mehta into ICA. And while he focused more on the West Coast, I was asked to try and mobilize support on the East Coast.
I see.
So my association with ICA is also half a century old.
Wow, that's so beautiful. Thank you. And we hope it continues for a very long time
It
because
will.
that
It's an
kind of
organic
support and
relationship.
enthusiasm is very needed, right? So we can make things happen. Thank you. The next question is to Zubin. What do you feel are some of the concrete achievements you have been able to make in the last 10 years of your spending time in Bihar?
Right. So, like I mentioned, our model, it's sort of like a two-tiered model, right? Because we're training youth leaders, and then youth leaders are working on a variety of issues. So, in terms of youth leaders that we've engaged and trained, we've had about 1,000 youth fellows thus far, and
Wow.
through them, we've worked with about 50,000 children in the area of education. We've done a lot with Nukkad Nataks because my co-founder is a theater artist. So we've done Nukkad Natak shows for about 5 lakh people on various issues related to everything from child marriage to um, various healthcare schemes to education to the environment. Um, Recently, we've been doing work in healthcare. So we've been doing training. We've done trainings for about 100 ASHA workers and community health workers related to tuberculosis, as well as for about 2,500 community members. And we're also in the process of identifying people with cases and treating them, though that's not as far along. Um, I think the purchase of our 15-acre campus, although that will take several years to bear fruits, I think is a big sort of achievement because I think in the longer run, when you can create something like a the role that something like a Sabarmati ashram plays or that kind of institution and development, I think is really important. So I think that will take longer to bear fruit. I mean, right now we're doing skill trainings for about 20 local artisans in mud and bamboo. Um, what else? We created a 25-person entrepreneurship incubator as well to help support local entrepreneurs, primarily agro-based, and created a 250-person sort of network for those entrepreneurs to share learnings with one another. So yeah, those are a couple. And maybe I'll just share one quick story as well. So another thing that we do is after these youth work with us, we help them sort of go on to other training programs or to work with other organizations. So there's one organization that we work with that I like quite a bit. It's called Navgurugu. So they have a 1-year course for local women to learn software engineering, but also sort of life skills and leadership and about various social issues. So we've sent about 12 girls there thus far. And for those who have graduated, many of them have gone on to work like in the IT sector or in the IT function of various like organizations, and they're generally earning somewhere in the range of like 30,000 rupees plus, which has a huge impact on sort of their family's economic situation and also on, I guess, their own ability to be sort of young, independent women in the world. So
Wonderful. I mean, that's a lot. You are training the trainers, you are using a very beautiful medium, visual medium to teach social norms and aspects of living life. And you are covering so many aspects of life itself, training, giving education, women, all of this. That's really wonderful. Wish you
thank
lots
you.
of luck, Zubin, moving
Thank you.
forward.
Thank you so much.
The next question we have is about a couple of our attendees are curious about how the farmer struggle connects to the environmental issues, Ravi, that you are dealing with.
The farmers' struggle, as it is being reported in the media today, is more to do with the threat of them losing their lands eventually.
Hmm.
The issue of the minimum support price is important, but that is not number one in their minds. The farmers are also extremely worried about the falling water tables in the most well-off farming parts of India, which is Punjab, Haryana, and Western UP. A lot of groundwater exploitation is taking place over there. Farmers are aware of it. And I think here uh, there is there are movements like the revitalizing the rain-fed areas network, okay, or movements to promote coarse grains. The government has to realize that coarse grains are more nutritious and far less water consuming than wheat and rice. And if we were to shift the emphasis of minimum support prices to making these more remunerative, today the coarse grains are considered inferior goods. The government and public at large doesn't promote them. But that is the future. Okay. Back in 1991, one of my colleagues, Devashish Sen, and I wrote a paper on this subject saying natural bounty, artificial scarcity. And in that, we had pointed out that this would be the approach. Now, the Punjab government tried it, at least on paper, a few years ago. They made commitment to gradually shift farmers out of wheat and rice into less water consuming crops. But that has remained on paper. I think these are only beginning steps, and it's only a matter of time before we see much more action in this direction. So
Awesome.
conserving
Thank
water
you.
resource is the biggest environmental concern of the farmers. Okay?
So it's very much connected.
Yes.
uh, Maybe they don't express it that way at this moment, but great.
Yeah.
And here's a question for both of you. How did you go about involving the community to solve their own problems, to bring about social change?
Zubin, you want to
I,
go first?
oh, you're muted, Zubin.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think one thing that I was clear on from the beginning is that I'm not local, no matter how much Bhojpuri or Surjapuri I speak. No one would ever sort of was mistaking me for a local, and so I knew that I needed to have a really good local partner. And so I founded my organization with a local guy named Abod, who I think is probably the sharpest person I've ever met in terms of understanding sort of social dynamics and what people are feeling and how to connect with people. And so I think I've actually allowed him to enable a lot of that work because that's his strength. I think the second thing, the first thing that I did, which actually led to an organization getting founded. So I was thinking a lot how in my college there are these award ceremonies for people to sort of pitch ideas that they have to, end poverty or, solve some big development issue like across the world. And they get huge awards. They could be as much as $250,000. And I kept thinking, here's a community, here are people, they know the issues that they're facing. Many of them have ideas. Many of them want to come together, but what they don't have is sort of a platform and resources. So if we're going to do something, then simply what we need to do is provide a platform, give some resources, and then continue to provide mentorship, connect them with mentors and so on. And so we just went into the community and we just had a meeting and we asked people, what is it that you would like to do? And they explained how in the local school, it was the Mukhia's brother was the head teacher in that school. And so he never showed up. He would just sit in his hardware shop and he would just send someone else in his place. So the school was almost non-functional. And they said, we also can't afford to send our, younger siblings and our children to tuition. And therefore, if you could train some of the youth in the village who are already educated and provide them with some material, then we can start a center here. So we were like, TK. So we supported them to do that. And yeah, so that's just sort of an example, but that's been the continual approach.
Yeah, you're starting with them rather than
Right.
this is what I want to do. You're
Right.
saying, what do you want to do? What do you
Right.
want to see happen in your, then it brings them into the fold right away.
Right.
Yes, they feel comfortable. They may open up to suggestions. Wonderful.
Right.
And Ravi, how about
Well, the
the
approach is
environmental work you're doing? Yeah.
quite similar. Um, in the beginning, we did not go with any schemes and projects and ideas. We went only when people asked us for help. Okay. And when people ask you for help, then you uh, have discussions with them, ask them to identify their problems. Usually, the problems that they identify are not the real problems. So, you, through a process of questioning, you take them to really zoom in on the real problem.
Mm.
Then you ask them for solutions to those problems. Okay. And so it's a process of dialogue, and that process then generates possible solutions. At that stage, you say, okay, let's try it. But then who's going to do the work? And at that stage, we may introduce the idea of having a local organization. Typically, we find that women are more in the villages. Many of the men are missing. Therefore, we start wherever possible, and that's mostly almost everywhere. We start with women's organizations, Mahila Mangal Dals. Okay? And this also enables them to build their self confidence, and gradually they become members of the panchayat, they begin speaking out, they become members of the panchayat. And today, fortunately, there is some amount of money that is released by the government to the panchayats. And to begin to use that money wisely is one step. Okay. Sometimes the real problem is the confrontation with the vested interests. And for that, the solutions have to be devised locally and they vary from place to place.
Wonderful, wonderful. Empowering people to take action is really so lovely. I think the next question is kind of related. How do you keep your workers motivated on a long-term basis? But I think both of you may have answered this question in some way, but can you share a few thoughts? And before you start, I just want to say we are getting close to an hour, and we have quite a few questions. So we will do a couple more, and then maybe uh, Reshma will, our president, will officially close the meeting. But if Zubin, Ravi, and Ritu, if you can stay on, uh, maybe we can address some more of these questions. Would that be okay with you? Okay, thank you. So now back to this question of how do you keep your workers motivated on a long-term basis?
Zubin, you want to try that one?
You can go first, Raviji.
Okay.
Pele aap situation, yeah.
Well, he is the younger one, so he gets the first chance. Um, Typically, as they say, nothing succeeds like success. So, as the colleagues begin to uh, get that feeling that I did something that works, that is a very big motivator. And to
Mm,
constantly remind people about even the small victories that they have achieved is very helpful. But you will have to invite my wife, Jo. She does
mhm.
a far better job at motivating her team, which is much bigger than the team at PSI, than I can do. So my suggestion is you better talk to her.
Yes, absolutely. I am noting that down. we,
Okay.
we can all learn motivational skills, right? Thank you.
She is fantastic.
Great.
Okay. Zubin, over to you.
So I mean, I think it would be the answers would be fairly similar to the way that maybe different people in this group would respond. So if I flip the question around and were to ask, say you, Padma, like, what is it that makes you motivated? I'm asking rhetorically. Then I think the answers would be fairly similar, even in like a rural Bihar context. So I'll give an example. I wish I had this photo handy so I could show it, but in the construction of our Earthshala campus, like the vision for that campus is actually very complex. It's about using different kinds of local materials in order to sort of validate the local knowledge that has been created over many years, and also to create methods that can be spread into the communities. Like it's very complicated. But when we onboarded local sort of people to work on that project and to work on the construction, and also some local artisans, our team held a meeting where everyone was asked, sort of, what is your vision for this project? Why do you want to be involved? What about it interests you? And many of the people are, say, like local Adivasi women who work in the tea gardens. And unfortunately, who probably in the work in the tea gardens are never asked, what do you think? What do you want? What are your goals? What are your aspirations? So I think that piece is huge. To actually involve people, allow them to have voice, allow them to put their opinions forward and to be heard. And then, yeah, the second thing, I think what Ravi ji said is completely on point. I'll just share one other quick story. So there's a guy who joined our team named Sulender, and he joined as a driver. And in the beginning, if I were to be completely honest, his nickname in the team was Dabang, because he's like a young guy and he sort of had that like cool attitude and all. But over time, so because he's the driver as well, he would go to all the trainings, he see all of the programs, and slowly it was sort of starting to seep into him, and he would also get more and more responsibilities. So during the pandemic, we've provided sort of ration assistance to more than 50,000 people. And a big part, or he played a huge role in that. And I think that ability to actually go and meet someone who's very vulnerable and be with them and saath dena in like a time of great need and vulnerability, I think was really life-changing for him. To the point that he noticed that there were people who were walking home during the lockdown who worked in sort of the local brick factories, who were walking back to West Bengal and Assam. And in his village, he organized a local sort of feeding campaign for 2,100 people who walked by. They provided 2,100 meals. So local people gave rations, some people gave a bit of money, some people did the cooking. And I think that, again, his confidence increased more. Then he saw children in the cold who didn't have enough warm clothes. So he went to all of the kapde wale and he asked them to give warm clothes. Again, they did it. Mm-hmm. So I think those kinds of small successes. Now he told me he dropped out of school in class 8. He told me that he's joining back to complete his high school. He also wants to take English classes. So it's like a sort of snowballing effect, right? When you see small successes, it really builds up your confidence.
Great, lovely.
Just want to intervene here. This is a very interesting example. And I have noticed this frequently. Drivers, because of the nature of their work, are extremely observant people, okay? Far more than the ordinary person. And their observations are so insightful that they suggest a lot of good ideas to us. Okay, I've had this experience throughout my work in this field.
Yes, so true.
Thanks, Zubin.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Ravi.
Thank you for sharing that example, Zubin. Lovely. And Raviji for adding to it. Yeah, you're right. They are silently observing, or with a very what is it called, poker face, observing and
if they've been driving on
coming
that
up
route,
with ideas, I guess.
Yeah, Padma, if they've been driving on a route for many years, they see all the environmental changes.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. Wonderful. So, we have some very interesting questions still coming up. But at this point, I would like to bring on Reshma Nigam, our president, to share a few words, and then everybody please stay on and we will go back to getting answers to these wonderful questions from our attendees.
Thank you, Padma.
Take away, Reshma.
Thank you, Padma. Good evening, everybody. Good morning, whatever the time zone might be. I don't know what to say. I've just had a delightful evening listening to all this. I first want to thank our esteemed speakers. Ravi ji, Dr. Ravi Chopra, that we call you, is how we refer to you at ICA, has been, you know, like a founder. He's one of the founders of ICA. So he's basically folklore. When the newcomers come in, we tell them about Ravi Chopra. So it's delightful that you could come. I know we had to postpone this forum and all of this COVID happened, but I am so glad that you made it. As everyone knows, he's logging in from Dehradun. Zubin, what can I say? He's my second son, I feel. I am a Bihari. I was born and raised in Patna. I'm going to be spending a month in Patna. So it's just, when he first went there, I couldn't believe that he would have gone to a place like Kishanganj, because we were never allowed to go to Kishanganj. It's like a very dangerous place. He's showing you a very idyllic picture in the background. It's like probably once in a year that he's seen this photograph. But Kishanganj is a dangerous place where hardly anyone goes. It's very difficult to approach Kishanganj. There is no direct communication there. He has to take a train somewhere, and then finally makes it there. I remember Deepak Basu visited you, and he had to take 2 trains from Calcutta to even approach there. So it was fortunate that he was sheltering at place at his father's. His father and my husband went to college together. So I have seen Zubin since he was an infant. And I have nothing but admiration for his parents, because the selflessness with which they have given their son to India and to Bihar is unmatched. And I don't know how many of us would be able to do this. I know Ritu's son also works in India in another very difficult NGO proposition, which he started. And that is why she was brought in to do this conference, to host this event. Ritu, as you heard, is highly talented. You enjoyed her engaging conversation. Her son heads up an organization called Take Her Back, and he rescues women and children who are caught in prostitution. So, you know, these things just give us goosebumps. This is what motivates us. This is why we try to help NGOs. And someday, who knows, in another life, I would be Ravi Chopra and Zubin Mehta. But thank you very much, and good night to people who need to go and need to drop off. But please continue. Padma, thank you for organizing this. Padma heads up our events committee, and she is right now in Bangalore helping her daughter with her 2 grandchildren. So it's like everybody sort of came together, and it's been amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Padma. Good night,
Thank you,
everyone.
Reshma.
Padma,
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for attending and making this successful. You know, without all the questions and the enthusiasm and all the preparation the 3 of you have done, we couldn't have done this event. So like I said, we have a few more very interesting questions from our attendees. So if I can start off. The first one is, will rainwater harvesting reservoirs help to reduce water mismanagement? I don't know, maybe it's a very, it's a very deep question, Ravi, about, you know, how it will help with dealing with the mismanagement.
Yeah. you know, there are two levels of rainwater harvesting. One is the personal level. Like I live in a house where we do the rooftop rainwater harvesting. So whatever rain falls on the roof, part of that gets collected in a tank on the underground tank. At the community level, it's important to recall the traditions of rainwater harvesting in India. These traditions are old and they still work and they can be revived. But for that, we really need to recognize that there must be community control of the local natural resources. That was the system that sustained these resources for thousands of years. Okay, I have been to water resources that have been maintained for more than 1,000 years. They still work, they still supply water. And the pipelines that the engineering department introduces goes bust in 5 years. Okay, so community control of natural resources is very, very essential. Okay, and I think we need to think at at the village level, at the watershed level, for creating these local water harvesting resources. Okay?
So then we could, I mean, the mismanagement probably will still happen, but then it can be worked out maybe.
There'll be hardly any mismanagement because it is going to be locally
It's going to
managed.
be
It can be
locally
resolved.
managed, right?
It'll be resolved on the spot.
Correct. You're so right. Yeah, it goes back to what you shared about involving the community and giving control, empowering them rather than leaving it to some big bosses somewhere else. Yeah. I think that the next question was for Zubin. Can you give examples of youth who have benefited from the program you are running? And connected to it is, how do you fund the youth leaders in your projects?
Sure. So maybe I'll start with the funding question. So we've been lucky that we've been able to attract funding from a number of high net worth individuals in India, like Mr. Narayana Murthy, founder of Infosys, and two other Infosys co-founders, Mr. K. Dinesh and Mr. S.D. Shivulal, and also founder of Icar Motors, Mr. Vikram Lal. I
Wow.
think that's been a major challenge because a lot of funding in India is sort of either A, strategic, or B, sort of based on one's personal affinity. So you'll see that oftentimes the most developed states in India actually get the most funding. So states like Maharashtra, Gujarat, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, those are the states where there's the most funding available. So it has been a continual challenge to really, I guess, sell people like on the vision of what we're doing. And I think as we had a few sort of bigger name people who supported us, it's also enabled us to raise funds from some foundations like Azim Premji, philanthropic initiatives, and some CSR as well from some companies. But yeah, it's definitely sort of a continual struggle because you say Kishanganj, everyone's like, oh yeah, I went to Kishangarh once. It's close to Ajmer, right? So not many people have heard of it or know where it is, and not many people want to fund in Bihar. In terms of some success stories, so yeah, I mean, I shared a couple. I think all of the girls who we've sent to Navgurugu, to that program where they're learning software engineering, I would count all of them as like major successes. I think we've also had some people who have joined various fellowships. So there's a Gandhi Fellowship, which is a fellowship which works on building the capacity of various functionaries in the education system. So some people who've worked with us who have gone on to work in the Gandhi Fellowship and also as like aspirational district fellows. We've had some people who've become entrepreneurs. We have a girl who has become an entrepreneur who's using natural materials to make jewelry, using bamboo, jute, local seeds. So yeah, those would be like a couple.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you. I think there was another question um, I'll address to Zubin. How do you, if there is corruption,
Bhrashtachar.
and how do you deal with it? In continuing your work while these forces may be strong, maybe political forces that may want to have a part in what you're doing, maybe not a good part in what you're doing.
Right. So I would maybe break this into like three pieces. So one is like political influence. Two would be corruption at the level of administration. And three is like, what do we do or how do we engage? So I think we haven't really faced any issues from local politicians, especially not at the level of, say, MLA or MP. Within a village, you'll face issues with the local mukhya, who's like the local panchayat head, who's elected. And so there is a bit of ego massaging and so on that you have to do to make them feel like, like if you're doing some event, you create a special chair that they sit in and they feel like, hum to hai. Um, so some of that, but nothing like them trying to extort money from us. The second is corruption and within the administration. So that, of course, is sort of an endemic issue or challenge. I think what I've learned, though, in engaging with a lot of government functionaries is that oftentimes the quantum of work that they have versus the number of functionaries, one, and two, the way in which it goes from top to bottom. So if you're somewhere in the middle, you kind of don't have any choice but to, like take money here and there. And then the third is, those are normally like from schemes or somewhere in the system. And then the third is like, what is it that we do? So I think for us, what we've learned is one, patience. So for example, we put up, we needed electricity for our campus. So we just got a 10 kV connection. We waited, I think, for like 2.5 years for that to come. And it was continuous follow-up, going through like the online system, going and speaking with people in Patna, speaking with people in Kishanganj. So it is like a tax that we have to face in the sense that, we have to wait all that time and we have to keep going and visiting people. But I think if you want to do things sort of the right way, then you have to be patient.
Lovely. So it's, going back to your earlier thing, you get the buy-in of well-known people to your program, and then you're able to work with the local issues, and everybody likes to feel good, right, about what they're doing. So I guess telling them that you're an important person in this whole project makes it easier for you. That's lovely, very, very nicely done, I think. There was one other related issue was, do you feel any effects of the Naxal movement there?
Me in Bihar or?
Naxal, like in Kishan.
No, we don't. No. So in fact, Naxal Bari is close by, but yeah, we don't have that movement.
And Ravi, there was one question about how to improve water harvesting in India. Maybe it's a very big question. I don't know. It's a very broad question, possibly.
Wait, Padmaji, can I just really quickly chime in? So one of my teammates is here, Eureka, and she also asked a really good follow-up question about water conservation in water rise farming regions. So maybe we can add that on as well.
Yes. So let me get to that question. Why don't you, do you see the question?
Zubin, can you ask the question directly?
Sure. So it says, Ravi ji, how do you suggest we propose water conservation, such as water rise farming in regions with high groundwater, such as Simanchal, Bihar, which is where we're working, parts of West Bengal and further Northeast India? Or technically, is this not an issue we need to be concerned about at the moment in this region? And if not, what are the key environmental issues that the rural plains of these regions need to focus on?
Well, I would say that if you are in a groundwater rich region, try to focus on dug wells rather than tube wells and bore wells. Tube wells and bore wells will end up exhausting your water one day. In terms of using it, perhaps those people um, who have that luxury of not needing a crop every season, they could try doing some tree plantations. Okay, certain trees that are useful also require a lot of water, and one can have a tree plantation. Um, the Then of course there are the better thing is to conserve the water. I would not say just because you have a lot of water is to go ahead and use as much as you can. Try and conserve as much as you can. Therefore, the dug wells. Okay. Um, but again, these are questions that I prefer to respond to after I've visited the area and seen what is possible over there, rather than sit long distance. And I must confess that I have not been to Kishanganj at all. Been to a lot of places in Bihar, but not Kishanganj. So please invite me.
Yeah. It goes without saying. We'd love to invite you.
We're all inviting ourselves, Zubin.
But I wanted to get back to that issue of the Naxal. It reminded me of a major program that we had undertaken in the district of Palamu, which is now in Jharkhand and in Bihar, back in 1993. It was a big program, and wherever there are government programs, that's where the Dabang people try and extort money from you. We were caught in a situation where we were trying to create empowered local organizations, Pani Panchayats, in the villages. We were working in 125 villages simultaneously. And on one side, there was the Ranveer Sena, which wanted to keep the oppressed down. And on the other side were the Naxalites that were trying to empower the oppressed people. Unfortunately, there were some groups of Naxal people who would try and collect hafta, okay, or who actually came and told some of our local teams that get lost because they saw us as rivals. We were trying to empower people, they are trying to empower people. So, ये हमारा बेस तो नहीं छीन के ले जाएंगे. At that time, there was a stroke of genius, and I had a friend who had local chap who was very friendly with the Naxal leadership, and I asked him to join us as a political consultant. I said, you help us resolve the conflicts with the Naxal people. Gradually, the Naxal people realized that we were not there to threaten their base, that we would eventually move out. And so the conflict died down. Okay. That was my one major interaction with the Naxal problem.
So many things to make this whole, right? Whatever project you're doing, you have to take into account so many other factors that maybe when you started the project, it never came to mind. That, you know, it's 3 levels down, but you still have to address it at some point for the success of your project. That's amazing, amazing. There is a question about how can, Ravi, you've been involved with ICA for 50 years. What can ICA do to have an impact moving forward? Where maybe areas that ICA could get involved with, or more at a deeper level, or?
You know, again, it's the same problem that though I've known ICA for 50 years, there is a real physical distance, and I'm not quite aware of what are ICA's resources presently, human, financial resources, etc. So I think ICA is doing a good job of providing funds to organizations that are working on the ground. Secondly, I would like to, maybe on my next visit to California, I would like to spend time with friends in ICA. And I am interested more and more in this issue of mentoring young people to work on the problems of the nation. And it's not just the young people in India, but also the young Indians in the US. Okay. There are problems both in the US as well as in India. And the integration is very important, I think. Okay.
Great.
So it's not just focusing on India. You are now very much a part of that country.
Yes,
okay?
yes.
And you need to focus on that country too. Okay.
Yeah, it's wonderful because you bring it up, because we are just starting this youth program, and we are bringing at least 11 students and maybe more for a 2-week immersion program in Himalkasa in Maharashtra. So because,
Yes.
and they have all said, you know, they want to get to know what's going on, and this is their parents' homeland, and they just hear about things, but they want to be there on the ground at an NGO. And so I'm sure, Zubin, we will come, you know, we hope to take more and more groups in the following years, and we will definitely make your project hopefully to be a part of our trip, you know, in the future. There is a question about, are you anticipating or hopeful of replicating these projects that you both do in other parts of India?
The work that People Science Institute has done, when I look at it, what we started doing in the early 90s, I remember a district divisional commissioner saying to me at the end of the 90s, he says, Ravi, wo sab kaam to ab sabhi kar rahe hain. Usme ab koi nayi baat nahi rahi. So that kind of work is already replicated. You know, the concept of building local organizations, of empowering local people, and so on. These are not common things in the 70s, 80s, and even the early 90s. Okay. We ourselves learned from the work of Chandi Prasad Bhatt in the Chipko Andolan, Anna Hazare in Ralegan Siddhi, P.R. Mishra in Sukho Majri, etc. I will be the first to say that we didn't do anything new. We simply learned lessons from these characters. Okay.
So it's putting the learning to newer or more wide array of the population, probably.
The fortunate thing is that there are people who want to learn and try new things. That is very, very useful.
Lovely.
Zubin?
And learning from something is like someone observes your projects and tries to replicate it is probably much more effective than you trying to go to every part of India and trying to make it
we did put the whole Palamu experience into a major government program called Participatory Watershed Development. But after a few years of expansion, that got scuttled bit by bit. We are trying to revive it again.
Good luck with that. Yes. There's a comment from one of our board members. He says, as I understand it, the farmers in Punjab and Haryana are afraid that the government will drop price support for rice and subsidize free water and fertilizers. It's not clear that these farmers are concerned about water conservation. Any comments, Ravi?
Yes. I would not quite agree with that.
Water table falling.
See, the farmers are very concerned about the falling water tables. Okay. But they are equally concerned about the switch that they had made to chemical agriculture. They realized that, what is the water being used for? It is being used to take the chemicals that they have applied from the fertilizer that they have put in, to push it into the plant, and that's how that plant will uh, be more productive. Okay, so when you switch from chemicals to organic material, then there is a lot of soil moisture that you can use for the same purpose. Okay, and you don't need so much water in that case. So there is a genuine concern, and farmers are they're literally there's an organization called Kheti Virasat, which became active maybe about 15 years ago in Punjab, and they've got a huge outreach to tens of thousands of farmers. Okay,
Great. Yeah. So at
so
some point they will realize what
the
they do.
realization is there, but the switch over from chemical agriculture to organic farming involves a period of few years over which your production might decrease. And that is what scares farmers. How will I be able to afford that?
Survive.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe what we need is this thing called the payment for ecological services. So if a farmer is switching from chemical agriculture to organic farming, then you need to give them the payment for the ecological services that he or she renders. And that should not be considered as a subsidy.
Okay.
You're paying for something that he or she is contributing.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Great. Lovely. I think that's all the questions we have. And I remember you mentioned you need to get off, Ravi, at this time. But last, anything you all like to share? Ritu, Ravi, Zubin, anything you like to share with us? One line, quick, what is it?
One quick line that I learned from my wife and our youngest daughter.
Yes.
Was that if we create systems, when we create systems that can take care of people in society who can't help themselves, then we create systems that can take care of everybody.
Great. Thank you. Lovely. Zubin, any parting comments?
I wish I had something so profound to say. I think, so one thing that I just want to say before I forget, so I want to take the replication question and also the ICA question maybe offline with some of the ICA team, because I have a couple of ideas that I'd love to discuss.
Fantastic.
Related to that.
I got your message. We'll talk again.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Perfect.
Definitely.
Secondly, I think this kind of forum is extremely required. And I think actually my Tauji asked a question about how the diaspora can sort of be engaged along, like not only giving funds, but what else can happen. And I think that there's a lot of scope. So I think these kinds of forums give a chance for us to discuss such possibilities and also to connect, Indians who are working for collective action around the world. So I look forward to more such forums, and I feel very grateful to have been able to join.
Thank you so much for your participation.
Padma, may I take a moment?
Yes, absolutely, Rishma.
Zubin and Ravi, both of you, Padma is going to be heads up our youth program. And we are taking kids back to India this summer. She's heading that effort. So for next year, if possible, maybe we can explore visiting you, both your either one or both or whatever. So that is something we should explore. And I think it's been, if you guys give us ideas on how well we can serve, how ICA can serve NGOs, that would be very, very appreciated. And that is one way to answer your Tauji's question, is for us to get the second generation like you more involved and inspired.
Right.
And that was my thinking when I planned this, so that we could see how Ravi did this 40 years ago and you're doing it now. And now Aika, with Padma's help, is taking kids back to inspire. And Ritu was asked to do this because she has the experience of her son doing the same thing that you have done. So Ritu, if you would like to say a few words before Padma closes, but
you know what,
thank the Aika team for helping us. There are a lot of people behind the scenes, as you can imagine, who are helping. So a big thanks to them. So yes.
You know what, I think that the world has become a flatter place. And there was a time when, India was far away and America was, there was a distance. Now we can see, Zubin is probably doesn't think twice before hopping on a plane and going, and the distances have collapsed. Communication has become so much easier. We have over here people from Dehradun and Bangalore and California. And so the world has become a smaller place, or a flatter place, as the book said. So I think that this new collaboration is that much more feasible. Like Ravi said, he would love to get involved with California's or the US issues. And, California, we know, has drought, and we also struggle with water harvesting. So I think that there is a scope for, in this new world, to work closer and effortlessly.
True.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
I mean, this would not have been possible if Zoom had not allowed, if COVID had not exposed us to Zoom, because, for our conferences, we would love to have had Ravi Chopra and Zubin come and speak at our events, face-to-face events, but we never thought of this because it was not so acceptable. And now it seems like it's the way to go. And we've had the opportunity and the good fortune to be able to host them only because of this situation that we are in, the new norm.
Right. Yeah, we will continue to host quarterly forums, hopefully. So, please keep Aika in mind, and speakers and people who are doing good work, so we can reach out and share the information with everyone, and facilitate these kinds of meetings. It's very, very precious.
Zubin, I'll respond to your...
Yes, go ahead, Ravi.
Sorry. Zubin, I'll respond to your Tauji by email.
Okay, perfect. And actually, my mother-in-law as well has a good question for you. So I'll send that to you as well.
Okay.
Lovely. So before we close, I really want to say how happy I am to be part of the Aika team. And be able to participate in these events. And so all our members, fellow icons, if I may call that, thank you so much for being here. And if any of you want to share a word or two before we close, otherwise we will call it a day and we'll meet again soon. Is there anyone who'd like to say something?
I just shared my email in the chat. So if anyone wants to get in touch, please feel free.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you, Ravi, for your time. Greatly appreciate. Very informative session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ritu. Thank you, Ritu.
Thank you, Ritu.
So I will say bye-bye to everyone right now, and we will meet again very soon.
Thank you, Padma.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.